So first of all, good evening, also from my side. And to kick it off, I never promised that this is not going to be boring. So it's legal, it's going to be boring. Strap in, now you're sitting here and you're not allowed to leave. But all jokes aside, I would like to invite you guys to first scan this QR code. The QR code is our virtual handout for the evening. In the handout, you're going to find a little prompt builder. You're going to find some interesting sources for you to read and some contact information. And as a little benefit for you all this evening, Planet Legal is giving you a year's license to their data protection software at half price off. You'll find it in the promo. Getting that out of the way, what do I want to talk to you guys today about? I want to provide value. What do I mean by that? I would like to show you what I have experienced while using AI, what worked very well, what didn't work, and how you can emulate it. I have bad news up front for everybody. We're not at the spot yet where AI can take over your lawyer's job completely. So if you were hoping for that, then, well, tough. I hope everybody has the QR code so far, because let's kick it off. Just a few sentences to myself. I'm of counsel, an external lawyer from Planet Legal. I focus mainly on AI and cybersecurity and data protection. So if you have any questions regarding DORA, the NIS2, or the AI Act, I am a semi-competent person to speak to. And what I want to show you today is what issues legal demos for legal AI have in the real world. I want to explain to you how you can extract real value from AI for legal tasks, and the difference between what could save you some money and what could cost you a lot of money. Let's start off with what AI in legal can and can't do today very well. You'll notice that many things that you see here on the screen relate to initial work, first pass reviews, summarizing documents, drafting standard clauses from templates. These are all elements which AI today can do reasonably well. Issues arise when we have jurisdiction-specific tactical advice, when you're talking about things that the AI maybe has a sense of in its training data but doesn't have the foresight to properly work with. Novel patterns, new general filings, new guidances that we have from regulatory authorities, those are all often not in any kind of training data, so the AI won't know what to do with it. And in the worst cases, it'll either hallucinate something or it will cite any old precedents, which then also leads to you not being able to use the output. And also, AI is very bad at knowing what it doesn't know. So, yeah. The issue with a lot of AI demos that I've seen and that I see when people present them to me is what we all know about confident hallucinations. AIs will sound competent for about anything. They'll be overconfident when they give you an assessment instead of being careful and letting you know that there's things that may be true or may be correct. They'll say, this is exactly how it is, if they don't work with a proper disclaimer. A lot of legal demos are cherry-picked, so you have very, very simple cases and you have very predetermined paths the AI has taken many, many times, and so the result looks amazing. But as soon as you then try to use those things in different situations and in your daily use, it fails. And as I already touched upon earlier, just now, stale regulatory knowledge. This is a big one, especially here in Europe, where we have constantly updated and constantly changing laws and regulations. The training data of AI can't keep up. and so you often get wrong answers and outdated references. Where can AI create immediate value for you? Faster contracting, faster research, the time it takes to get from questions to answers. Now, I'm pretty sure I know what all of you are thinking, but okay, that's great and all for you as a lawyer, but how does that benefit me? And it benefits you because AI can be used, if prompted and structured correctly, for you to gain knowledge, structure, and awareness about how you need to take your cases and problems forward. I noticed today, when I'm talking with clients that are actively using AI, that the way they approach me with questions comes with an extreme heightened quality. They're far better structured, they're far better researched, and they deliver to me something that I can work with much faster, meaning I need to build them less, and everybody wins at the end of the day. Tonight, I want to show you a few things that I built myself. The link to those tools, they're openly available. Everybody can use them and try them out yourselves. These are just a few that I find particularly mature and that have provided and added value to other people as well. And then I'd also like to talk about AI skills, because those are, in my opinion, also extremely important for all work, not just for lawyers. So I created an AI compliance dashboard. It's a dashboard for where you can have a quick AI Act assessment, find out what you need to do, what you shouldn't do, and what your next steps are. Can this replace your legal assessment from a lawyer completely? Of course not. But it can enable you to be informed and be an informed person about what you need to do next and ask the right questions. I'm currently advising an AI company from Switzerland on their HR solution. And it's noticeable that these colleagues have done proper research and that they've done used AI for their structuring by the way that they ask questions and by the feedback that I'm getting from them. And it's really, really great. Regulation tracker, so you get a nice overview over what's coming, what's currently in force, what's maybe relevant to you. A contract review assistant with a built-in prompt that I designed that anybody can use to have a high-quality first pass at a contract. Again, will this take away or replace a lawyer completely? Of course not. But if you already have the output that says, here are major red flags, you urgently need to check this, this also enables you and helps you to ask the right questions and put your resources where you need it most. The Legal Prompt Studio, I think this is also something that that's very interesting for most people. The way this was made about 3 years ago now, I designed a series of very, very complex prompts, and then I sat down with Claude Code and asked Claude Code to help me extract the logical framework of what I had written as a human, and then we compartmentalized it and created a framework for building your own prompts. So if you go to the Legal Prompt Studio, you'll find the core prompts that I myself created, and you can just use those. But you'll also find a prompt creator where this basic knowledge has been presented in a way where you can check, for example, what kind of, in what field, employment, M&A, IP. There's, I think, 15 different categories, and you can select your prompting, you can select your parameters, and then create your own custom prompt. It works very well, and a lot of colleagues of mine use it as well. And another really interesting one is the Legal AI Benchmarks. It's also a great knowledge resource to find out what AIs score very well on current benchmarks for legal tasks. AI skills. I think most of you probably know about skills. I'll just give you a very, very brief intro. Anthropic, about, I think, a year ago, introduced skills as a new type of format for AIs. It's, on a technical level, only a very, very smart prompt. It's a recipe that the AI can use again and again. However, the way that, for example, Claude uses skills is it enables you to create workflows that have a steady stream of quality. So instead of every time saying, when you check an NDA, to check for for A, B, C, when it comes to the clauses, the NDA checking skill knows that already, and it'll deliver far more consistent results. Now, I'm part of an open source community called lovable.com, and at Lovable, a lot of lawyers and legal professionals have written skills that are open sourced and free for everybody to use. And you can go to the website, download the skills, and integrate them into your legal workflow or your general workflow right away. I've selected 4 skills that I created here. The first is one for tech contract negotiations. It helps the AI to properly zero in on things that are relevant during tech contract negotiations, like provisions for SaaS or other kind of or other times that are relevant for tech contracts. Vendor due diligences. That's for flow downs when you need to check if your vendor is ready to comply with DORA or the NIS2. What I think for many of you could be interesting is a legal simulation. It's a client simulation persona skill, which basically transforms your AI into your own personal lawyer-client simulation scenario. So you can ask your questions and see what responses you get, and also prep for more pressing matters. And my favorite skill, to be honest, and the one that I use multiple times a day, is the red team skill. The red team skill is an adversarial skill which treats every kind of AI output as faulty until proven correct. So basically, when I'm done with my AI routine, I'll ask the AI to trigger the red team skill and verify its output. And the AI will go through its output, consider everything to be wrong until proven correct. And to be honest, you can essentially get accuracy of probably 90% or higher with this skill. So it's really great and also in use by a lot of colleagues and friends of mine. How do you build your own tools? How do you go about it when you yourself want to build or create things with AI that make sense for your daily workflow? First of all, you need the correct AI. I am a big believer in Claude and Claude Code and Claude Cowork. I think that is the model and the provider of the most high quality legal outputs that we have on the market. So that's in my opinion a good place to start. But obviously preferences matter here. And maybe your field has a different LLM that benefits from it. So the design philosophy is quite simple. Start small. A lot of people have the issue that they want far too much in one go. They expect their AI, and I know we all have high hopes for what AI can do productively, but they expect their AI tool to do everything in one shot, and that doesn't work. It's not efficient. It's not how AIs work well. You should keep it simple. You should keep it focused. Escalation built in. Especially when it comes to legal questions, AIs do very, very well when they're told that certain things need to be weighted, because that's the way they're trained, that's the way they're created in the first place. So having AIs weigh risks, weigh problems, and things that AI needs to address also has very, very good results, because it leads to the AI going through it again internally, structuring the output, having to think about, is this really high risk? Is this medium risk? Is this low risk? Because the question, is this risky, is far too open. But asking or forcing the AI to go through its own thought process to design a list that says high, medium, low also again triggers far, far better outputs. And test before you trust. I have not seen any kind of AI in any capacity that I could trust blindly. And I am almost ashamed to admit that I use it far too much. But even if you're running Opus 4.6 with extended thinking mode on, you still run into issues with when it comes to precision, citations, etc. So there's always the mandate to test your outputs before you trust them in any way. Pick a problem worth solving. Similarly to what I opened with earlier, do not try and get everything all at once. Look at something that you do every day or that happens very, very often in your daily business, no matter if you're doing legal work or non-legal work. This is universal. Pick one thing where you say, this is something that I really need to have solved, something that makes sense for me to have solved. And I'll give you a concrete example. One of the tools that was not listed here is a legal note-taking app that I created. And that sounds boring, but what it has is it has the most important definitions for all core EU regulations as verbatim texts in a little knowledge hub integrated into the note-taking. Because I need to look up definitions multiple times a day, and I don't have them printed. I don't want to look them up every time on the regulation homepage, etc. So I just go to my knowledge hub, I say DORA, I look at the DORA definitions, and I have them. Saves me, I don't know, probably 30 minutes every day. It's great, it's efficient, it solved one problem. The problem was I constantly need these definitions for these regulations, and I need to have them handy, and I can have them on my phone, I can have them on my iPad. Works great. Set the bar before you build. Again, ask yourself, what am I going to expect? Do I want this to have perfect output? Probably not going to get it. But if you prompt and structure correctly, you'll have a great first pass. And with a great first pass, you're 80% along the way. And simple as a feature, for me, something that you can do yourself and that you can create with minimum effort is worth a lot more than having something that you spent a lot of money on that maybe also works and maybe comes with a lot of features that you don't need at the end of the day. But when building yourself and using time to actually curate your own tools, you have the benefit that you can actually see what works and what doesn't, and then also take it from there. So, for example, I got into building legal tools by noticing what kind of gaps I have in my daily workflow and what kind of gaps I see in the legal market. Now, of course, there's probably very, very expensive solutions for almost everything that I do. But the fact of the matter is that with my little Claude subscription, I was able to essentially build a ton of tools that I personally need almost every day at work. And it saved me a lot of time, and it's bespoke to what I precisely need. And I think that's also something where AI is going towards, that we all get the solutions that we need as individuals in a very bespoke way. And I think, if you ask me personally, that's what I think the future is going to look like. How do you go about this? First step, write a brief. Write down what you want to accomplish. Try and be specific. Do not ask, I need this, or let's just do this. The issue is that a lot of people hear and read that prompting isn't important anymore, or AI models are so intelligent now, you just give them very simple questions and they'll figure out the rest. Honestly, especially if you're doing complex technical work or complex legal work, it's just not true. Boundaries matter. Setting the expectations of what the AI should be doing matter, and that'll probably be true for the foreseeable future. Get a prototype. Ask the AI to create what you want. Ask the AI what it is good at creating from a technology standpoint. In my experience, asking the AI to create a simple HTML tool with JavaScript and CSS works wonders. It's very, very easy to have this up and running within a few hours or even a few minutes, depending on what you're doing. I have just yesterday evening and this morning created a new NIS2 checking tool, which looks really amazing thanks to the current Opus models. And that's also something that can be used in virtually any kind of environment. Run your worst cases. Also, as I mentioned earlier, don't focus on the things that are simple. Don't focus on the things that run very, very well. Focus on the things that are hard. Why? Because knowing the gaps matters. AI is capable of doing a lot of things, and it's very, very good at many, many things. But what in my experience, knowing what AI can't do, what your model is not good at, and where its limits lie, is far more impressive and far more valuable to know than finding out what it's good at. Because it's good at a bunch of things, but knowing what it's not good at, that's where the real value is, because then you can plan around that. And then just as a personal tip, obviously there's a bunch of ways to do this, but Netlify is a great service where you can essentially drag your projects, deploy it within minutes, and have it try it out, share it with others. And that's also how I deploy my tools and how you're all able to try them later on. What doesn't work? What failed? What kind of lessons have I learned here? A big one, multi-jurisdiction contracts, things that are complex beyond what the AI scope can currently do, very, very tough. AI zero in on specific jurisdictional knowledge. They'll mix them up. They'll have wrong precedents. It's very, very difficult to have AI work a contract that goes beyond the scope of what you do nationally, at least in my experience. What AI also fails at a lot is deadline calculators. When you're looking at what's my deadline for court filings, when do I have to report things, sadly, AI is very bad with dates, I think as most of you probably have also noticed, so that's also not something that I would have generative AI do at the moment. And open-ended questions. Again, everything that's unstructured, everything that's, well, is this okay to do, is not something you're going to get a great answer for. Okay, got that one right off the bat. So a bad prompt is always something like, is this okay? Is this risky? Do I need help here? Things like that. For legal tools especially, and for legal work, you want as much context as possible. You want to be certain that you're working with the right vernacular, meaning what kind of, for example, in the strong prompt example, what kind of company do we have? What kind of contract am I dealing with? Who is the party? Where is the party located? And also, again, as I said earlier, find out what you actually want to know. Do you want to just saying, review it for risks is dangerous? Telling it, do we have a proper data protection agreement in the contract, and does it comply with Article 38 from the GDPR? That's great. That's something the AI can easily work with. It's targeted, it's focused, it's something that's most likely also in their training data. When you get your results, what do you do then? You ask twice. The asking twice is the mental birthplace of the red team skill. I noticed that when I ask AI twice to check its own work, or when I ask the same thing 6 hours later, sometimes tends to give different kind of results, which for a legal question shouldn't be the case, but that's how it is. So ask twice, get verification. I'm a huge fan of forcing AI or asking AI to cite things verbatim. Why? Because if you're asking them to cite specific things verbatim, you can also quickly cross-check if those things exist. I think a lot of us that have the fortune or misfortune of working a lot with Copilot probably have often had the case that, court cases, have been completely fabricated. It loves to do that. But if you force the AI to specifically cite which law and which article, etc., you can quickly Google it, quickly verify it, and know if at least what you're getting told exists in the first place. Adversarial testing, like I said, with the legal red team skill, for example, but honestly, telling the AI to test its own output and assume that everything it did is wrong is already going to get you great results. And scope boundary, again, not asking the AI to just simply look for all kinds of risks, but to give it pointed questions and pointed ideas. What important issues might I be missing? What issues have I already identified? That's a really big one. That also leads to the AI giving you better outputs. Trust, verify, escalate. In my opinion, you can try and categorize these things. For standard questions and for day-to-day business, you can trust AI when you want something explained in plain language. If you have a complicated regulatory text and you want to know what it actually means for you, that's where it's really strong. Drafting standard contract language is also something, maybe not a complex share purchase agreement, but if you need an NDA or if you need a simple consulting agreement, it's going to do a great job at that. A first pass overview with, again, the caveat that a lot of regulatory knowledge in the AI training models is outdated, so still be careful there. When you're going for regulatory compliance advice, that's where you need to be really careful because, again, stale knowledge is dangerous. Contract risk assessment outputs. Also, again, if you didn't properly prompt and secure the parameters of what is risky for you and your business, it's going to essentially rely on its own training data to find out what it thinks is dangerous or risky, and that probably likely will not be what you find risky. And escalating to an attorney when you have regulatory enforcement actions levied against you, IP liability, penalty exposure, and anything with major financial stakes. In general, when to escalate to legal and when to hire a lawyer for your business is, of course, always a question of business decision of the business and a risk allocation process. I would never advocate for people not asking their lawyers or not going to a lawyer, but the fact of the matter is that we need to face reality, and there's a lot of standard work today that AIs can do very, very well, and where going to a lawyer today is no longer necessary, in my opinion. Now, here I have a few scenarios that we've already touched upon partially here. So where AI can actually really save you some money on in your business ventures. So for a founder or a solo operator, standard NDAs, getting a first round of terms and conditions, privacy policies, and why? Because these are so abundant that they're most likely also in the training data. So that's why AI is typically pretty strong at reproducing them and having a first pass at them. Same thing with SaaS or with a standard MSA. Here, I think when talking about MSA and with contracts, my favorite example is with Claude is a year ago, just a year ago, when I asked Claude to create a contract, the best it basically put out was 9 to 10 pages of okay wording. And currently, the best thing I got out of it for today, or not today, but currently, was a 36-page MSA with really very, very good legal language. That was of a quality where I would not have an issue with customizing it a little bit and giving it to a client to work with. So that's also something where AI can really save you some time and money on that. And regulatory mapping, finding out what actually is important for me, where do I need to start, where am I in my regulatory process? A lot of people start, and I think it's, I know we all say that having all these regulations is difficult, it's complicated, but AI can really help you cut through the jungle and map for yourself what you need to know and where you need to go next. Because the largest risk exists if you start building, if you start your business, and then at some point later on down the line, when essentially regulatory compliance is already missing and you're maybe already in breach of certain regulations, and then you start shopping around for a lawyer, and then you start asking around. So AI can really help to help you get your bearings when it comes to regulations and laws, so that you're not all that lost on the topic. A few things where AI can get pretty expensive, in my opinion. Bad prompting for GDPR, IP assignments, AI drafted equity agreements, non-competes without compensation. So you see, as soon as things get a little bit more technical, as soon as they get a little bit more complex, that's when things become expensive, when they go wrong. In this section, you'll find a short representation of the prompt builder that I have for you guys in the handout. So when you go to your to that section, you'll be able to build your own little prompts, and you'll have something of fairly high quality to start out with and work with today. I could not leave you guys, let you guys leave today without talking about GDPR and data protection, just for one slide, I promise. First thing first, GDPR, AI Act regulations, they go together. They're not mutually exclusive. Some people somehow think that, if we're talking about personal data, AI Act doesn't apply and whatnot. I've heard this a few times. I'm not really sure where it comes from, but that's not correct. The most important thing when you're looking at GDPR and AI training, using customer data and everything else, is, as always in GDPR, the lawful basis. So essentially, you really need to be careful and make sure that the way you're using personal data is secured by consent or any other applicable GDPR reasoning for data processing of personal data. And another thing that I've seen a lot of clients not do correctly is not adhere to data minimization. It's as the AI Act, also the GDPR is not an absolute law in that sense. So a lot of times when regulators do an audit, they're looking at how you conducted yourself. They look at if for the business you're doing, have you taken the appropriate measures of security? Now, there's no absolute standard here. So, but one thing a lot of people get wrong is that they don't adhere to the principle of data minimization. And especially when it comes to feeding your AI system with any kind of data that could contain personal data, I would always advise to strip it down to the bare minimum, and ideally, of course, take personal data out of the question entirely. Before you use AI on your client data, there's always 3 questions I would ask. Who's processing it? What lawful basis? And are you actually capable of properly responding to data subject rights? If you ask yourself these 3 questions and then double check them also again with your AI, you'll be in a good position to know if you have gaps or if you or if you're actually good to go for now. I told a few people earlier today that in my head I had rearranged this presentation about 6-7 times before I came here this evening, because when I created the first draft of this presentation, so much had happened, and I want to use a few minutes to talk about something that I found so relevant and valuable for everybody that it warrants having a quick talk, and that is the dangers of agentic AI and the fact that nobody's taking it seriously enough, in my opinion, at the moment. So as you all know, agentic AI is where we're going next, meaning we now are at a stage in the development of AI where the models become truly autonomous, where we give them tasks to actually work through, Claude Cowork, for example, or of course OpenClaw, where you're really able to hand off tasks that the AI completes on its own and without further supervision. And what we're seeing more and more, and that's basically what I'm also trying to highlight here, is we're seeing it a lot more in the financial space, meaning there are banks, finance institutions. Claude is now able to also read and understand COBOL, the language used for ATM machines. JP Morgan is testing a huge agentic AI system, or has deployed an agentic AI system for their compliance protocols. And the issue is, if I, as a human, make a mistake in, say, the banking context, if I accidentally click and send money, or maybe I make a mistake in the compliance, in our compliance Excel, okay, you know, it's a mistake. It's not good, but it's a mistake. But if an agentic AI system, for example, falls prey to a prompt injection attack, for which there is currently no proper defense against, and that agentic AI system suddenly commits to thousands of trades or falsifies gigabytes of compliance data, then we have a huge regulatory breach and real danger to essentially all of us at the end of the day. You know? Because when AI systems suddenly start to have control over financials and are able to affect real world financial decisions, I think that is an area that we are not very well prepared for, because the productivity and the optimization gains can or will be huge, but on the flip side, we do not have the proper defenses to actually make sure that what I just described doesn't happen. Yeah, so, and just to highlight that a little bit more, for agentic AI systems in finance, there are a few things where we can have major advances: money laundering detection, fraud detection, trade efficiencies. You know, there's real value here where AI could actually make sure that that things run more smoothly and, you know, that more profitably at the end of the day. But the risk currently is that the AIs are completely helpless against a prompt injection. There's no way to really tell if your system has fallen prey to it. And I talked to someone at another talk I gave a few weeks ago, and he said, well, yeah, but there's always a human in the loop. There's always someone looking at it. But let's be honest, if the AI is going through thousands of files, trades, compliance reports, whatever, and just presenting the output to the human is just going to say, it's fine. He's not going to look at that, because otherwise, why did the AI have to look at it? And that kind of thinking is going to be prevalent, because nobody's going to want to pay for someone to sit there and check and control these things manually. And it might sound good on paper, but the risk, in my opinion, is extremely high. And the QVOSP also ranks the prompt injection attack scenario as the #1 LLM vulnerability, just simply because there's no way to protect against it. And another thing that I want to also highlight is memory poisoning. This is also something that happens without anybody being, without an adversarial effect to it. So one of my favorite examples is I asked Copilot not too long ago to give me a good clause for, I think it was for confidentiality. And then Copilot gave me the clause, and I thought, that really sounds pretty good. It's well drafted. It's not bad. And it turns out that was just my clause, because it grabbed that from a earlier conversation that we had, and it sold my own clause to me as the standard. So that was a bit weird, honestly, but nonetheless a good clause in hand. So what are we taking home today? Legal AI or AI in legal is ready, but it's only ready for constrained, verifiable tasks. Define those tasks, otherwise you're not going to have a great time. The best legal tools, in my opinion, solve exactly one problem. I'll give you another example. I'm sure all of you, or most of you, have heard of Harvey AI. It's supposed to be the premier legal tool. It's also very good. But even if you have the allegedly top legal tool on the planet at your disposal, it's very, very noticeable that if you give it small, concise, and simple tasks, the output is amazing. As soon as you want it to go through 10 different documents at the same time and give you a consolidated report and do A, B, C, D, E, it's going to fail. Or even worse, it's going to sound like it did a good job, and it didn't. As I said earlier today, always cross-check twice for everything that's relevant. Structure your prompts. Never skip counsel for anything that has a high financial exposure or complex IP agreements. And to end today, I want to make a case for how regulation is not the villain in the room that it's often made out to be. I personally see regulations as something that, when used correctly, can actually be very beneficial to all parties involved. For example, I think that the AI Act, while not being perfect in any way, contains a lot of smart and good ways to think about AI security. And I talked with a potential client today during lunch, and he said, well, I'm not doing high-risk AI, so it's not really important for what I'm doing. And I said, that may be true legally. However, the way that the security is structured in the AI Act, the questions it asks, the points it makes about transparency, they're valuable for everybody. It makes sense to know these things. The AI Act wasn't written by someone who was bored. It was written by people that actually thought about what would make sense to have safe AI and have AI that we can scale sensibly. And I think that's why you should look at regulation often more as a playbook and not as a hurdle. And that playbook is something that will help you get an edge in the future. And I also think that regulations are able to cap the more dangerous aspects of AI. So I think that AI in its current state, especially when you're thinking about the agentic scenario, can be very dangerous. But if it's framed in a regulatory compliant way, if the user is informed, if the user is using the tool in a proper way, it becomes dynamic, it becomes helpful. I think AI can be unpredictable, but that unpredictability can, again, in the right structure and with the right tools, become a system that is ultra adaptive. So I think that regulation and AI together is what actually makes AI a productivity tool to be reckoned with. And that is what I want to leave you guys with tonight. I think that the regulations that we have in place are a sensible foundation. I think AI is a transformative technology that will shape our future. And I think all of us are the architects of using that transformative technology for safe, scalable, and sustainable success. And that's what I wish for all of you. And thank you very much.
What's your take on running open source models for legal stuff versus using closed source models that you pay Anthropic or OpenAI for?
Emotionally, I'm a huge fan of using open source wherever possible. I think it's great. But the practical reality is that currently the open source models that I've tested were not able to deliver the output that I require for the quality of work that I'm looking for. I think that for simpler tasks, I think it's perfectly fine. So I think what we touched upon here, the first pass ideas and everything else, I think you can very well work with open source models that you can also host locally. But when it comes to really complex results and high quality results, sadly, there's no getting around the big providers at the moment.
Patrick, thanks a lot for sharing your experience and conclusions. But I have a few questions more. How long did it take you to develop such a product? Did you work yourself? And if you could start developing such a product today from scratch, but having your pains and successes, what would you do? What would you avoid? What would you redo? Thank you.
Yeah, let me... Okay. So the AI Act compliance dashboard probably took me 2 hours. The regulation tracker also. The contract review assistant was a lot more complex. That probably ate about 3 weekends, give or take. The legal prompt studio is difficult to put a specific timeline against it because the time I spent creating and drafting the original prompts was huge because that was at the beginning of AI, so that was pretty quick. The AI timeline, for example, was helpful but done in 30 minutes. The legal definitions navigator was a bit more complex. It probably took about 3 hours. And the legal AI benchmarking was also about done in an hour because I simply needed to verify the links because Claude Code had issues with getting a few of the links. What would I do different today? Not much, to be honest, because and it's gone. Thank you. I think I was lucky enough to immediately bet on the right horse with Claude Code and Claude Cowork. I started off with Perplexity about 3 years ago, and then I noticed because it has a very nice way of choosing different models, and you could basically test all the models that are available. And I noticed pretty quickly that Claude gave the best output for legal. And so I wouldn't really change anything regarding that. What I can, hot tip, what I would do differently today is I would start building knowledge bases in Markdown format from day one. That's something that that I would really advise everybody that wants to start building dependable knowledge bases. I have all major EU regulations in my project knowledge for Claude, and I had them as PDFs for a long time. And then I noticed that when Claude accessed them, he tool calls and this call and extraction and parsing and whatnot. And then I said, could we do this better? And Claude said, well, yeah, sure. Why don't you just give it to me in Markdown? I said, okay, that's actually, I could have gotten to that realization myself. And so that's something I would definitely do differently. So I would think my data repository approach in an AI first way, because ideally, I don't want to look at it again. The AI needs to be able to work ideally with it. So that's what I would definitely do differently today.
Thanks for the presentation, very interesting. You mentioned the AI skills by Anthropic. What is your personal take on MCP? Like, do you build also tools in MCP standard, or?
Thank you. Because this reminds me of something that I forgot to mention in the presentation right now. So I personally haven't built anything with MCP yet. One of my latest projects is a regulatory RAG system that I built with Supabase and Voyage AI, also of course with Claude. But what I found really interesting for MCP usage as is, and those of you that know me, I'm a huge fan of democratizing knowledge and making knowledge more accessible. And I talked to one of our partners at Planet Legal, and he said, Patrick, you need to look at what we're building. We have this amazing MCP server that we're going to launch soon for our clients. And I said, well, what is it? What are you guys doing? And he said, it's basically a regulatory RAG system. And I said, that's cool. I built the same thing, but like for almost €0. And I think, and the fun thing was what they did was of course much more sophisticated, because Planet Legal also has like a small software development house, and it's much more professional and everything else, and much more powerful than the free tier thing that I made. But the fact of the matter is that without actually having the knowledge of building something like that from scratch, was able to achieve a quite similar result with extremely little invest on my part. And I think that's really amazing. And when it comes to using MCP, honestly, I think the idea is great, but the most MCP servers I've used have been kind of unstable. So I always wonder if the stability is good enough to warrant a steady deployment. So not sure, but I haven't built one myself, so I really can't speak on that.
Couple of last questions.
When uploading a contract in one of the tools, what do we have to take into account?
Excellent question. Everything that I'm sharing here with you is all done on device. There is no processing of the data you put in apart from what sits in your browser. So there is no nothing here is AI processed. So for example, if you have the contract review assistant and it prompts you to to input a clause, or you can also input an entire contract, there is no processing. Your data doesn't go anywhere. It's all done on device. I designed all of these tools to be minimally invasive in every sense of the word. So none of the tools you find on my website in any way have external databases, dependencies, or whatnot. So it's all on your device. So there's nothing you need to take into account on top of what you would normally have to take into account. That's where you need to be careful. So no IP, no personal data, no trade secrets would be my top 3 to get started.
So question is, how do you see this when asking something to the AI, or do you have any possibilities how to make this better, or how to improve this, or how to handle this?
Yeah, thank you. Two-part answer to that. The first one is pretty simple. We already touched upon this a little bit. Having proper retrieval of knowledge for legal AI is basically the holy grail, because trying to have it being certain of your sources is so incredibly important. I mean, that's why a lot, not just me or my colleagues at Planet Legal developed like a RAG server for regulatory knowledge, but I also have another friend who also did something in parallel basically at the same time. So it's clearly something that lawyers require. It's very, very difficult to do for a running business, because while having having laws and regulations retrievable in a high quality way, that's quite easy. But your daily communications that come in, your daily contracts that come in, that's a different story, and that's a problem that's currently not really solved yet. How I do it is I basically look at two things. My main AI use case is it makes me faster, and it can only make me faster if we're talking about things that I already know. So I rarely use AI for things that I'm not familiar with. That's basically where I start from scratch and learn in the very traditional sense. But things that I know very well, those are tasks that I hand off to AI, because my verification process is really quick. For example, when it comes to DORA, I know how a DORA addendum for contracts needs to look like, and I probably need about 15 minutes to check it. If I have an AI output and the AI says this and this and this is in there, and then I know, okay, this is correct, this sounds good, and then I'll have one quick look at the actual text, see if that my eyes basically spot the correct keywords, and that's good enough. But that only works if I already have the knowledge, and that's why for lawyers, in my opinion, AI is an accelerator of knowledge or skills that are already present in the lawyer, and it's not very good at providing new knowledge, because you always run into that verification issue.